The paintings in this series honor Negro Leagues players as superior athletes, not as storybook legends. As the Bible says, there is a time for everything, and in the 19th and 20th century, there was a time for Negro Leagues myths. Then, players toiled in relative obscurity, so it was sometimes necessary to exaggerate individual accomplishments so the white press and wider public might take note of what was happening on diamonds across the country, and indeed, the world. Thanks to the work of countless researchers, we now have a more complete record of these remarkable players. There are still gaps in the data, but what it does show is that the best players across Black and Latin American organized baseball were more than capable of sharing AL and NL diamonds with their white contemporaries. In 2020, Major League Baseball acknowledged Negro Leaguers as Major Leaguers. But this was not an elevation, it was overdue recognition. These players are compelling without need for embellishment, and deserve to be celebrated not as mythic figures, but as real people of extraordinary accomplishments. Relegated to the margins, they rose on their own merits, and continue to rise. Today we meet them anew, rendered realistically and in exquisite color by the brush of Graig Kreindler. In the years following the Civil War, baseball captured the hearts of millions across the United States, young and old, men and women, Black and white alike. In a country so recently riven by the question of whether it was right to enslave another based on the color of their skin, the game held great promise as a unifying force, a sport that not only developed strong bodies, but strong bonds as well. But even baseball, what many were beginning to call the national game, was not free from what ailed the nation. Black baseball in the 19th century arose as a reaction, indeed a rebuke, against the wicked current of skin-deep racism still endemic to American life. Built upon a foundation of bravery, brotherhood, and an indomitable barnstorming spirit, it defied the forces arrayed against it to grow into a uniquely Black institution that in time would transcend borders and transform the world. In 1865, Octavius Catto, an educator and early activist in the fight for civil rights, founded the all-Black Pythian Baseball Club of Philadelphia. Serving as team captain and club secretary, Catto led the Pythian Club on road tours throughout the Mid-Atlantic in the summer of 1867, and that October sought membership in the National Association of Baseball Players. Despite support from convention president Hicks Hayhurst, a fellow Philadelphian, the Pythians were denied due to the color of their skin. Nevertheless, the Pythians played on, and in 1869 met the All-White Olympic Club, also of Philadelphia, in a contest described at the time as the first of its kind. Catto's campaign for equal rights on and off the diamond would be tragically cut short 2 years later in 1871, when he was attacked, shot, and killed by an election day mob. Just then, some 200 miles to the north, near Cooperstown, New York, a youth by the name of John Jackson was embarking on what would become a prolific ball-playing career. Known professionally as Bud Fowler, he'd make his minor league debut in 1878, pitching the otherwise all-white Lynn Live Oaks to victory over Tommy Bond and the reigning NL champion Red Stockings. It was Fowler's first triumph in a decades-long career as organized baseball's first Black professional. His pioneering work as a player, manager, and executive set a template for other Black pros. Men like Moses Fleetwood Walker. A star catcher for the University of Michigan, Walker would catch 42 games for the Toledo Blue Stockings of the American Association in 1884 to become the first openly Black player to reach the highest levels of organized baseball. He would also be the last for more than 60 years. By the time Walker's career ended with Syracuse in 1889, baseball's white establishment had brought the color line crashing down to block the emerging new generation of Black ball players from equal and integrated play. Among them, Saul White, a formidable infielder whose ball-playing ability was matched by his skill with the pen, White published his History of Colored Baseball in 1907. The book championed the rising strength of all black clubs in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Even in the face of forced segregation, White foresaw a bright future for his burgeoning brotherhood of black professionals. Urging players to take baseball seriously as a profession, he predicted, quote, "Honest efforts with his great ability will open an avenue in the near future wherein he may walk hand in hand with the opposite race in the greatest of all American games." White's history included an essay on batting by fellow 19th century star Grant Home Run Johnson, who, despite his nickname, encouraged a balanced approach to the plate. In 1894, Johnson teamed with Bud Fowler to form the Page Fence Giants, who'd remain a barnstorming juggernaut through the end of the decade. In 1895, the Giants added talented second baseman Charlie Grant, whose star, together with Johnson's, would burn bright well into the new century. But as the new century opened, the most fertile ground for growing black baseball was located beyond the borders of the United States. By the end of the 19th century, the baseball craze had spread to the Caribbean. The game gained major ground in Cuba in 1874 when Esteban Bellán, the first Latin-born ball player to play professionally in the U.S., organized a match between clubs from the cities of Matanzas and Havana. Cuba's Spanish authorities viewed baseball with suspicion, calling it, quote, "an anti-Spanish game with insurrectionist tendencies." They preferred bullfighting, but most Cubans embraced baseball as a symbol of freedom. And freedom followed, thanks to the shared sacrifice of black and white in the Cuban War of Independence. The ball field triumphed over the bull ring. And in the pivotal season of 1900, Chino Moran led the all-black San Francisco club to clinch the Cuban League pennant over Havana and the pitching of Luis Padrón, a victory that caused other clubs to integrate, forever erasing the color line in Cuba. During the winter season of 1906-1907, black players from the U.S. began bolstering Cuban rosters, as the likes of Pete Hill, Rube Foster, Charlie Grant, Bill Monroe, and Grant Home Run Johnson flocked to Cuba, drawn by a chance to supplement their income, hone their skills, and experience a culture free from the discrimination they regularly encountered in the U.S. Cuban players, in turn, formed friendships that opened opportunities to play in the States. Eustaquio Pedroso compiled a 2.51 ERA in competition against white clubs, including a no-hitter against the AL champion Detroit Tigers in the 1909 Cuban-American Major League Club Series. By the end of 1923, 20 of the 88 players participating in Cuba's 4-team pennant race were American Negro Leaguers, while 27 hailed from major and minor white leagues. That winter witnessed the greatest of the Cuban Winter League teams as the Leopardos de Santa Clara finished with a .766 winning percentage, paced by Cubans Jose Mendez and Alejandro Ohms, as well as American Negro Leaguers Oliver Ghost Marcel, Oscar Charleston, Dobie Moore, Heavy Johnson, Frank Warfield, Bill Holland, Reuben Curry, and Dave Brown. Cuba's combination of homegrown stars, visiting Negro Leaguers, tolerant playing conditions, and higher salaries made it a cradle for one of the greatest groupings of baseball talent in the first half of the 19th century. One of the most electrifying players to ever play in Latin America, or anywhere else, was Mississippi-born James Thomas Bell, who burst into baseball in 1922 as a 19-year-old lefty for the St. Louis Stars. Stars manager Bill Gatewood reportedly gave Bell the name Cool Papa after watching him calmly strike out feared slugger Oscar Charleston. By 1924, Bell had transformed from a sang-froid teenage knuckleballer into a switch-hitting center fielder, using his lights-out speed to spur the Stars to 3 championships. Bell's winning ways continued into the 30s with the Pittsburgh Crawfords, whose 1935 squad featured 5 future Hall of Famers, Bell among them. Before the start of the 1937 season, Cool Papa and a core of Crawford Stars were recruited to play in the Dominican League as part of a super team sponsored by the dictator Rafael Trujillo. After winning that season's Dominican League championship, Bell spent the next 4 summers mashing in Mexico, capturing the Mexican League Triple Crown in 1940. Returning to the U.S., Bell remained a force well into his 40s, capping a quarter-century-long career by playing 4 stellar seasons with the Homestead Grays. For all his merits as a ball player, Bell was also known for his clean living and strong character. One former Crawford's teammate, Ted Page, remembered Bell as having been, quote, an even better man off the field than he was on it. The first 2 decades of the 20th century saw the construction of a slew of new stadia, but most black clubs of the era lacked the capital to build similarly fixed facilities. Renting ballparks while white teams were traveling was often prohibitively expensive, so to circumvent these problems, black clubs turned to barnstorming, which meant playing nearly every game of their schedule on the road. In the East, saw White's Philadelphia Giants emerge as a top touring club behind 19th century great Frank Grant and the speedy yet powerful Bill Monroe. Monroe's love of taunting opponents found a frequent target in the formidable Cuban ex-Giants, whose talented core coalesced around star shortstop Grant Home Run Johnson, whose long career had by now earned him another nickname: Dad. In the West, Frank Leland's Giants were next to invincible. That is until 1909, when the St. Paul Gophers captured the colored championship, helped by the fact that Leland's star pitcher, Rube Foster, was injured. For Leland, worse was to come. In April 1910, Foster took control of the team from him in court. Already a star, Foster was well on his way to becoming a legend. In Indiana, C.I. Taylor transformed the West Baden Sprudels into some of the toughest outs in the West, moving the team to Indianapolis in 1914 to become one of Foster's fiercest rivals. Back east, the Brooklyn Royal Giants and Lincoln Giants emerged as top clubs, while the Florida Hotel League offered top players a chance to play for pay during the winter season. On May 5, 1912, J.L. Wilkinson's All Nations Club debuted as a truly integrated team. Composed of white and black Americans, Cubans, Japanese, and more, the All Nations traveled together in a private Pullman car, and in 1913 won 119 of 138 games, behind the lightning delivery of John Wesley Donaldson, the smoke-throwing wonder. A clean-living lefty, Donaldson played most of his career on the barnstorming circuit, amassing at least 424 wins and more than 5,200 strikeouts. He was the perfect exemplar for black baseball's barnstorming era, a player whose abilities placed him in a league of his own at a time when there wasn't a league that would play him. That would soon change, thanks to one man's revolutionary vision. Born in 1879, Andrew Rube Foster emerged from his native Texas in the late 1890s to become one of the top pitchers of the new century. Midway through the 1902 season, Foster jumped from the Chicago Giants to join an integrated semi-pro club from Otsego, Michigan, his first experience playing integrated baseball. After continuing to play on integrated teams in Cuba, Foster felt integrated major league play was within his grasp. Shortly after seizing the Leland Giants, one of Foster's first moves was to take the team west, joining the California Winter League in 1910 to make it an integrated league of segregated teams: white, black, and Mexican. The 1915-16 winter season saw Foster's Chicago American Giants capture the California Winter League Championship, behind the batting barrage of John Henry Pop Lloyd and Pete Hill, who swatted 409 and 373 respectively. The formation of the Federal League, the First World War, and the Spanish flu pandemic all decimated the ranks of American National League teams in the 1910s. Foster hoped the major leagues would either backfill its ranks with black players, or add 2 black teams and integrate along the proven successful model of the California Winter League. But even when faced with severe player shortages, white owners preferred segregation. Frustrated by this lack of progress towards a fully integrated major league, Foster established the Negro National League on February 13, 1920. As a star pitcher, far-seeing executive, sagacious field general, and stabilizing league president, Foster knew no equal. At the time of his death in 1930, the New York Amsterdam News lauded him as having, quote, done more to develop and promote professional baseball among Negroes than anyone else. The success of Foster's Negro National League was made possible by the tremendous growth of black communities in urban centers like Chicago during and after the First World War. Throughout the 1920s, fan bases in these communities would greet and celebrate black ball players as stars and celebrities of the first magnitude. Possibly the best all-around player in Negro Leagues history, Oscar Charleston rejoined C.I. Taylor's Indianapolis ABCs for the Negro National League's inaugural season. Meanwhile, pitchers Bullet Rogan, Bill Foster, and Smokey Joe Williams were masterful on the mound. while five-tool slugger Turkey Stearns and catcher Biz Mackey ensured the new league's firmament was bursting with stars. In response to Foster's western-based Negro National League, Ed Bolden organized the Mutual Association of Eastern-colored clubs. Interleague competition proved fierce, as both circuits engaged in roster rating, much to the financial benefit of players like southpaw Dave Brown, who in 1923 defected from the Chicago American Giants to the Lincoln Giants in the East. Ed Bolden's Hilldale Club dominated the Eastern League, led by player-manager Pop Lloyd. Nicknamed the Shovel for his superior play up the middle, Lloyd was sensationalized as the Black Honest Wagner. When Wagner caught wind of the comparison, he was reportedly flattered, stating, quote, "It is a great honor to be compared to him." In 1924, Hilldale met the Kansas City Monarchs in the first Negro World Series, losing the tilt only to emerge victorious in a repeat matchup the following year. The Monarchs, for their part, claimed they could have made more money barnstorming than playing for the Interleague Championship, and it wasn't just a case of sour grapes. Formal league schedules gave formerly freewheeling teams less flexibility, financially and otherwise, while old obstacles, such as a lack of fixed facilities, still loomed as large as they had at the beginning of the decade. By the time the stock market crash of 1929 ushered in the Great Depression, the Negro Leagues faced an uncertain future. In what appeared to be one of black baseball's darkest hours, the brilliance of one of its brightest stars would light a path forward. Born in Alabama in 1906, Leroy Robert Satchel Paige combined an outsized personality with career longevity to become the face of Negro Leagues baseball, playing on some 250 teams in the US, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and Mexico. As the Negro Leagues' top gate attraction, Paige knew his own worth, often jumping from team to team for a higher payday. Augmenting an arsenal of pitches and different deliveries with sparkling wit and a buoyant personality, Paige smashed past barriers wrought by racial animus to bring wider attention to the Negro Leagues brand of baseball. In 1934, Paige's presence integrated the prestigious Denver Post baseball tournament, wowing the white press with his performance. In 1935, Paige and the integrated Bismarck swept into Wichita, Kansas to win the National Baseball Conference Semi-Pro Tournament, again drawing praise at the national level. In 1946, Paige continued to tip public opinion in favor of integration by participating in a coast-to-coast barnstorming tour with Bob Feller. 2 years later, in 1948, Paige would make his major league debut with Cleveland, and later that season become the first player with Negro Leagues experience to pitch in the World Series of the formerly all-white league. Of course, Paige had already taken part in a World Championship, winning the 1942 Negro World Series with the Kansas City Monarchs, a contest that featured 8 future National Baseball Hall of Fame inductees, Paige among them. In 1926, Rube Foster, the Negro National League's founder, president, and guiding light, suffered a nervous breakdown from which he never fully recovered. Without Foster's leadership, and facing increasingly dire economic conditions, the Negro National League collapsed in 1931. But other major Negro Leagues soon emerged. Even as team fortunes declined and salaries were cut, new stars were rising. Players like Sam Bankhead, Ray Brown, Josh Gibson, Crush Holloway, Buck Leonard, and Wild Bill Wright offered glimmers of hope at an otherwise bleak time. In 1938, Chet Brewer became the first American Negro Leaguer to play in the Mexican League. Brewer's sojourn south sparked a surge of black talent to Mexico, seeking, as usual, better pay and more tolerant playing conditions. By 1940, 60 former Negro Leagues players were playing in Mexico, including future Hall of Famers Cool Papa Bell, Willard Brown, Ray Dandridge, Leon Day, Martin Dihigo, Josh Gibson, Hilton Smith, and Willie Wells. Leading their recruitment was Jorge Pascual, owner of the Mexican League, who was ready to pay for top talent in a bid to form an integrated third major league that would challenge the primacy of the American and National Leagues. Pascual's efforts to woo white major leaguers with large contracts proved much less successful. However, this threat did add pressure to integrate the major leagues. Despite the steady siphoning of talent by Latin American leagues, US-based baseball executives held on, led by the likes of Alex Pompez of the New York Cubans, Cumberland Posey of the Homestead Grays, and Effa Manley of the Newark Eagles. Their tenacious fight for the survival of a second iteration of the Negro National League created conditions for success in the years that followed. In baseball, there's the good, the great, and then there's Josh Gibson. The preeminent slugger of the Negro Leagues and arguably the greatest catcher to have ever played the game, Gibson is credited with swatting over 800 home runs in 17 seasons against all levels of competition, stats that set him on a path to winning a combined 11 pennants while playing for his hometown Pittsburgh Crawfords and Homestead Grays. In the early 1930s, Gibson helped make Puerto Rico a popular winter league destination. And as a mid-season addition to the Dominican League's Dream Team Dragones in 1937, he stabilized a squad of Negro League stars to lead the club from the cellar to a championship. In a career that took him from Cuba to Mexico to Venezuela, Gibson played his final game in 1946, passing away just before getting a chance to play integrated ball at the major league level. He was 35, and to many millions, the greatest hitter who ever lived. Despite the uncertainty that defined the 1930s, black baseball roared into the 1940s as an economic force in black communities and a factor for social change nationwide. In Pittsburgh, power-hitting lefty Buck Leonard teamed with Josh Gibson to give the Homestead Grays lineup the greatest 1-2 punch since Ruth and Gehrig, while the black-owned Pittsburgh Courier promoted the Double V campaign, victory over fascism abroad and over discrimination at home, pressuring society to remember shared wartime sacrifices. Fans of black baseball in the 1940s watched some of the greatest players in the history of the game, as stars like Satchel Paige, Buck O'Neill, Willard Brown, and many others attracted the attention and adulation of new audiences nationwide. Star power and an ever-rising tide of domestic and international talent made it clear that black baseball offered an on-field product that was the best in the world, unrivaled even by the presumptively superior segregated white major leagues. Dubbed the Dominican Deer for his foot speed, Totelo Vargas leapt to the front as the best Dominican-born player of the era, while his New York Cubans teammate Pancho Coimbre was lauded as the best to emerge from Puerto Rico. A mere 15 years old when he signed with the Washington Elite Giants in 1937, Roy Campanella followed the club to Baltimore the next season, and 4 years later was selected to play in the prestigious East-West All-Star Game. Another rising star of the era was Larry Doby, who batted .356 and slugged .582 as part of the 1946 champion Newark Eagles. Mere months after Jackie Robinson's historic 1947 NL debut, Doby became the first black player in the American League, and would remain an AL mainstay for the next decade. The excellence of black baseball during wartime created a spectacle that was impossible to ignore. The story of Jackie Robinson's rise to break the color line was intertwined with the Negro League's greatness, and indeed its greatest lasting legacy. Jackie Robinson's 1945 tenure with the Kansas City Monarchs was brief. He played in only 35 league games for which we have box scores. But Robinson's impact on the Negro Leagues and the Negro League's impact on Robinson were both writ large. In August 1945, Branch Rickey signed Robinson to a contract to play for the Montreal Royals, the Brooklyn Dodgers' AAA farm club. Though the signing would not be announced until October, it effectively ended Robinson's Negro League career just 3 months after it began. Rickey felt no obligation towards the Negro Leagues and did not compensate the Monarchs for signing Robinson. Due to the color of their skin, the Monarchs were excluded from the national agreement governing organized baseball. Rickey regarded the Negro Leagues, including the highly successful Monarchs, as illegitimate and, quote, in the zone of a racket. Despite the circumstances of the signing, Negro Leagues players rallied around Robinson, with 2 important considerations. First, if Robinson failed, there was no telling when the next chance would come to break the color line. And secondly, that Robinson was not yet ready to make the jump to a major league stage. Baseball was his worst sport. Between leaving UCLA in 1941 and joining the Monarchs in 1945, the only semi-pro sports he played were basketball and football, two sports in which he truly excelled. It was Chet Brewer who changed that. A former standout pitcher for the Monarchs, Brewer was now manager of the Kansas City Royals, a perennial entrant in the California Winter League. He was determined to help Robinson improve his game by securing him a spot on the Royals roster. Amid a swell of post-war enthusiasm, the California Winter League opened its 7-week season in September 1945, with Robinson starting as the Royal shortstop. With the press documenting his every move, Robinson enjoyed a successful season. But Negro Leagues players and Dodgers brass shared the sentiment that, even while making great strides, Robinson still needed more seasoning. That same winter, he joined a Negro League All-Star team on a tour of Venezuela to hone his skills away from the scrutiny of the press. The American All-Stars, or Las Estrellas Negras, were built to mentor Robinson, instructing him on the finer points of the game. Robinson's roommate, Gene Benson, a veteran outfielder and contact hitter supreme, taught him to hit the curveball, Robinson's most glaring weakness as a player to that point. Negro Leagues players showered Robinson with advice, attention, and instruction because they knew that with a chance to smash the color line, failure was not an option. And with the right preparation, Robinson had the mental makeup and all-around abilities to shoulder the awesome responsibility of being the one to do so. From the time Jackie Robinson debuted for Brooklyn in 1947, it would be more than 12 years until the Boston Red Sox became the last major league team to integrate its roster. In a 7-year stretch from 1947 to 1953, the National League added black players at a rate of 3 every 2 years, and the American League at a rate of just 1 every 2 years. Teams were slow to add black and Latin American players to their rosters through a combination of financial and social factors. Some teams kept quotas, while others never gave proven stars the chance they deserved. Although more than capable of playing in the majors, the great Ray Dandridge never got the call to the big leagues, and spent the last years of his career as the premier player in AAA. Integration had arrived, just barely. But too often, veteran Negro Leaguers like Dandridge were dismissed as being too old for the new era. It remains somewhat surprising that more teams did not take advantage of the Negro Leagues as a new source of talent, especially when one considers the immediate contributions and achievements of black and Latino players. Desegregated baseball meant rising talents like Elston Howard and Ernie Banks could now take their deserved place as stars for some of the most storied, previously all-white franchises. But it also sounded a death knell for the Negro Leagues as a successful business enterprise. The second iteration of the Negro National League disbanded in 1948. The Negro American League continued into the 50s, but attempts to sign white players and women had little lasting impact on gate receipts. Nevertheless, the fading years of Negro League baseball were witness to many more firsts. Mamie Peanut Johnson became the only woman to pitch in the Negro Leagues as a member of the 1953 Indianapolis Clowns. The speedy Connie Morgan joined the Clowns the following season. In 1954, as a member of the Kansas City Monarchs, Toni Stone capped a prolific career as the first woman to play in the Negro Leagues, having made her pro debut with the Twin City Colored Giants back in 1937. When Jackie Robinson stepped onto Ebbets Field in 1947, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was studying at Morehouse College, still a year away from being ordained as a Baptist minister. King and Robinson would later campaign together for civil rights. Their trials and triumphs, along with the successes and sacrifices of the other pioneering sportsmen and women in the series, tower as a testament to what's possible through solidarity, shared vision, and strength of conviction. Shortly before his death, Dr. King told former Newark Eagle Don Newcomb, quote, "You'll never know how easy you and Jackie and Dobie and Campy made it for me to do my job by what you did on the baseball field."